Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lara Conley. On March 15, 1978, in the United States, a girl named Lara was born. She was the third child of Carlene and James. Lara is very close to her sisters, and her parents always love and care for their children with all their heart. However, everything changed when Carlene and James divorced. At that time, Lara was still a teenager, and her parents' divorce affected her very much. During her difficult times, she turned to alcohol and then became addicted to psychotropic substances. Her mother, Carlene, believed these issues stemmed from the divorce and blamed herself for her struggles. Carlene was born on June 13, 1945, in Virginia. Her three daughters are always her number one priority, and she feels responsible for everything that happens to them. She feels guilty because her divorce has affected Lara, her youngest daughter. This guilt causes she to seek to justify Lara's actions. As a mother, she was always supportive and tried to help Lara through her challenges. However, other family members and acquaintances often found Lara irritable and always wanting attention. Even though 20 years have passed since Lara's parents divorced, when her two older sisters were married and living on their own, she continued to live in the family home. She was unemployed and continued to demand attention from her mother, Carlene. At one point, Lara has a boyfriend, and he moves in with her and her mother, Carlene. Lara believed she was mentally ill and repeatedly sought medical help to be prescribed psychotropic medication. Eventually, medical professionals stopped prescribing these medications to her. Because of craving for psychotropic drugs, she begins sneaking into neighbors' houses to steal any pills she can find. She also took advantage of her mother's kindness, repeatedly calling her mother at work and bothering her for various reasons. This eventually forced her mother to quit her job. In 2008, Lara was convicted of a minor shoplifting offense, but was quickly released after her mother, Carlene, posted bail for her. Unfortunately, the situation only worsened. At first she just scolded her mother, but gradually she started abusing her mother. Despite being hurt, but Carlene did not want to report her daughter to the authorities or have her thrown out of the house. On one occasion, after a violent incident, specialists were called to assess Lara's mental health. Even then, Carlene allowed Lara to return home, believing it was her duty as a mother to care for her. Lara's anger is not only directed at her mother but also at her boyfriend, Chris Lewin. She was taken to court twice for attacking him. One incident occurred in late October 2014, when she woke him from his sleep and accused him of cheating. Their argument quickly turned into violence. During the scuffle, she bit him and used a kitchen knife, causing a minor wound to his arm. This incident resulted in Lara being charged with a misdemeanor and she having to attend anger management therapy. Even though she was over 35 years old at that time, her behavior remained unchanged. A few months later, on January 7, 2015, Lara was arrested again. This time, she bit Chris's finger when he tried to stop her from attacking Carlene. He cannot understand why she resents her mother, Carlene, so much. Carlene always wholeheartedly took care of her three daughters and 5 grandchildren, whom she cherished deeply. Carlene tried her best to take care of Lara, providing everything she thought could help Lara overcome her problems. Sadly, despite Carlene's unconditional love and good intentions, Lara's cruel actions towards her were not stopped. On March 14, 2015, Lara called 911 to report an incident at her mother Carlene's home. She told the operator that there had been a home invasion and that her mother had been fatally shot. Officers from the Independence, Taylor Mill, and Covington police departments quickly arrived at the scene and were met with a gruesome sight. Lara was covered in blood. And Carlene, a 69-year-old woman, was lying on the kitchen counter, barely alive and suffering from multiple stab wounds. When police questioned Lara about what had happened, she claimed she couldn't remember, saying she had lost consciousness. However, she mentioned that, 2 hours earlier, a group of people knocked on the door asking for candy, a common occurrence during Halloween, despite Halloween being months away. She gave police various descriptions of the suspects, prompting authorities to launch a search. Police set up a cordon in the area, but no one matching Lara's descriptions was found. To further investigate, the police brought Lara to the station for questioning. During the interrogation, she shared additional details about the assailants, but also introduced inconsistencies. For example, she believes she was targeted because she has not paid the drug dealers. She later gave contradictory accounts of how she discovered Carlene's body. She initially said that when she got home, she found Carlene dead. She later said she slept in the basement, and after waking up and going upstairs, she saw Carlene's body lying on the kitchen floor. Hours after the investigation began, detectives Mike Richmond and Jim Moore from the Independence Police Department quickly identified Lara as being involved in the case. It became clear that she had lied to the police about what happened. Evidence showed that there was no break-in, and no fingerprints were found on the doors or windows. This led investigators to conclude that Lara was the only person in the house when her mother, Carlene, was murdered. Early on the morning of Sunday, March 15th, Lara's 37th birthday, authorities arrested her for the murder of Carlene. The following day, Monday, March 16th, Lara appeared in court via video link. She asserted that she was not guilty. However, she was detained without bail and sent to county jail, facing charges of murder and domestic violence. The court also prohibited her from having any contact with her boyfriend, Chris. Prosecutor Rob Sanders said Carlene's murder had come as a huge shock to local residents, as their area was known for its safety and low crime rates. He stressed that the case was still under investigation and admitted that it was still unclear what had happened. He also said that the reason why Lara committed such a serious crime would soon be clarified. The forensic report revealed the brutal nature of the attack. An autopsy showed that Carlene had been stabbed 77 times. She also had 27 defensive wounds and 2 bite marks. On March 24th, Lara appeared before a judge. She explained that she had no money, making her unable to afford a lawyer. In response, the judge assigned her a public defender and proceeded with the hearing. During the court proceedings, Detective Michael Richmond testified that there was no evidence of forced entry. He stated that Lara herself had opened the door to let the police in, and at the time of the incident, only she and Carlene were at home. Detectives reported that inside the home, they found Carlene on the kitchen floor, surrounded by several knives. He also reported that when they saw Lara, she was covered in blood, which was found on her shirt, arms, legs, face, and even on her lips and nose. After reviewing police testimony, the judge sent the case to the jury. On April 16, 2015, Lara Conley was formally charged with the murder of her mother, Carlene Conley. During the trial, the jury heard testimony from approximately 50 witnesses. The prosecution bolstered its case with testimony from police officers involved in the investigation and members of Carlene's family. The defense argued that Lara acted in self-defense. According to her lawyer, the stabbing incident happened due to stress when she was attacked by Carlene. When Lara testified, she told the jury that she and Carlene had been arguing about how she usually celebrated her birthday. During the argument, Carlene picked up a heavy object and struck her on the head. Lara claimed she could not remember anything that happened after being hit, including the 911 call she made. The jury was told that after the crime, when Lara was given a medical examination, experts confirmed that she had cuts on her head and back, along with bruises on her body and a hematoma under her eye. On March 23, 2017, the defense and prosecutors presented their closing arguments. Assistant District Attorney Lawrence presented the evidence to the jury and emphasized the inconsistencies and unverified claims in Lara's defense. That same day, after 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found Lara Conley guilty of first-degree murder and recommended a sentence of 27 years in prison. Before the sentencing, Carlene's relatives submitted statements about Lara's influence on Carlene. Virginia, a daughter of Carlene and is Lara's biological sister, described her younger sister as extremely evil and sick. One of Virginia's daughters also criticized Lara harshly. Judge Leake sentenced Lara to 27 years in prison, as recommended by the jury. Another of Carlene's daughters commented that Lara was strange and denied accusations that their mother was cruel. She insisted their mother was not responsible for the conflict, denied allegations that their mother had ever harmed Lara. Lara's defense later filed a motion for a new trial. Lawyers argued that the sentence was invalid because Lara was not given the funds to hire a psychologist who could assess and confirm her mental health conditions, which included issues such as bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, and panic attacks. The defense also claimed that, leading up to the incident, Lara had consumed excessive alcohol, along with a nausea medication meant to induce drowsiness. Despite this, she reportedly had not slept for 4 to 5 days. However, the judge dismissed the appeal, rejecting these arguments, and ordered a court-appointed assessment of Lara by mental health experts. After reviewing the experts' report, the court ultimately overturned its initial decision. It was determined that Lara had the right to an independent expert. Additionally, the defense argued for the cancellation of the preliminary trial and called for a new trial, claiming that a mistake had led to Lara being found guilty. The prosecutor's office was permitted to present evidence of a previous attack committed by Lara. In June 2019, the Kent Supreme Court ruled that the trial court had made an error. The decision quashed Lara's 27-year prison sentence and ordered a new trial. However, despite winning the right to a new trial, Lara chose to avoid the retrial and instead signed a plea agreement. This reduced her sentence to 20 years, and she will become eligible for parole in 2032. Lara is currently being held at the Women's Correctional Facility in Kent. For Carlene's loved ones, Lara's conviction marked the end of the legal process, but it did not heal the pain. Their family will never be the same. Carlene's 2 daughters had to continue their lives without their mother's comforting words and warm embrace. The fact that a family member was responsible for Carlene's tragic death makes this story even more heartbreaking. Lara killed her own mother and has shown no remorse for her actions. Hey detectives, welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of the Ortega family. Paula, born in March 1986, is the second child in a large family. She excelled at Dario Figueroa Lara School and then went on to study at the Polytechnic University. During her time at university, Paula discovered her passion for the hospitality industry. After completing her studies, Paula became actively involved in expanding her family's business, focusing on the production of party goods. Her family, the Ortega Alcosers, were wealthy and highly respected in Sangalqui and surrounding towns in Ecuador. Paula's father had started his business by supplying party goods across Ecuador, eventually finding great success and enabling him to produce his own balloons, piñatas, and other festive items. This growth led to the establishment of multiple stores. The business success led to the opening of several stores in various locations, including in Sonoli in Ecuador's capital, Quito. Each member of the family played a vital role in the business, contributing to its development and operation. The father oversaw the expansion of the main production line, while opening new workshops for various party items. Paula and her 2 siblings each managed a store, shaping it according to their own vision. Paula's entrepreneurial skills extended beyond just managing her store. The business became even more successful when she added a party planning service. This venture brought her immense joy as it allowed her to bring happiness to people. Paula Ortega has achieved great success in her business career, but her personal life has not been as fortunate. Despite her youthful appearance, but she faced numerous hardships in her life, with her first marriage to Carlos Pedro serving as an example. After their first daughter was born, Carlos became an alcoholic. This led to him frequently disappearing from home, during which time he also stole money from Paula's shop. Things got worse when Paula discovered Carlos was having an affair, forcing her to end her marriage to him. During this difficult time, raising her daughter alone, Paula found it difficult to be optimistic to find happiness. However, with her family's emotional support and dedication to work, she eventually regained some stability. It wasn't until 10 years later that Paula met Christian Diego, a young man 4 years her junior. She was initially hesitant to trust him due to what had happened before. Christian, however, turned out to be patient, reliable, and especially skilled in forming a connection with Paula's daughter. 2 years into the relationship, Paula's heart softened towards Christian, and they decided to get married. Christian lovingly Paula's daughter as his own, and soon they welcomed their new daughter, Maria. Christian and Paula spent 5 happy years together, during which time Christian became an integral part of Paula's family business, helping to find locations for new stores. This job required him to travel often, resulting in frequent absences from home. Christian comes from a low-income family, but he has big dreams. He wants to one day own a large and successful business. In 2000, when her father passed away after a long illness, her life took a complete turn. The loss devastated the family and disrupted their business. Some people are so skilled at hiding their true nature that they can live with others for years without raising suspicion. A shocking and unexpected incident is often what exposes their true nature. And Christian's change becomes apparent after several incidents, which reveal his true character. Christian and his wife, Paula Ortega, appeared to be a happy and successful couple to those around them. But beneath the surface, their relationship was far from perfect. Christian saw an opportunity to take over Paula's father's role and fulfill his own ambitions of wealth and power. Unfortunately, due to his lack of experience, he made a series of failed business decisions. Frustrated and desperate, Christian's behavior towards his family changed dramatically. He began to resent them, then abandoned them to live a life of luxury. He immersed himself in a world of pleasure and became involved with many women and alcohol. Without Paula's father to restrain him, Christian's true nature finally began to emerge. Paula refuses to repeat the mistakes of her previous miserable marriage, but her relationship with Christian only gets worse. They had an unhappy home life, filled with frequent, that revealed Christian's true character, an ambitious and power-hungry individual who only cared about himself and demanded unconditional obedience. After a heated argument, Paula secretly filed for divorce. However, when Christian found out, his behavior suddenly changed. To maintain his status in the family and afraid of losing everything, Christian repented and tried to change everything. He sincerely apologized for his previous actions, saying that they were due to confusion and insecurity, and vowed to love and cherish his family. Convinced by Christian's words and afraid of being alone again, Paula decided to give him a second chance, despite her initial reservations. In an attempt to mend their relationship, Christian proposed a romantic dinner at home, which Paula agreed to. To prepare for the evening, Paula asked her parents to babysit her daughter. While getting ready, she still couldn't get rid of her mixed feelings. On the surface, she was very excited, but deep inside, she still longed for a happy, united family and durable family. The evening got off to a great start, with the living room decorated with festive garlands and the dining table lit by the warm glow of candles. Christian opened a bottle of white wine, and Paula served a hot meal. However, Christian's sudden announcement disrupted the peaceful atmosphere. He shared with Paula his plans for the Allure company, revealing that he had made a serious mistake in a recent tender, and it has resulted in significant financial losses. Christian announces that the company needs a new investor to stay afloat. This means that a portion of the company's ownership will change officially. Paula objects to the idea, believing that her father's business should remain family-owned. Christian, who has found an investor, becomes increasingly frustrated with Paula's objections. His eagerness to close the deal clashes with Paula's desire to keep the company in the family, causing tension in their relationship and spoiling the mood at dinner. On January 2, 2023, Paula took her youngest daughter to the playroom. She then went to her shop, where she was preparing a large order for an upcoming themed event, which involved assembling balloon fountains and party decorations. During her lunch break, two men showed up at the shop, despite it being closed. She opened the door, expecting a courier for the balloon bouquets she had prepared. To her surprise, the two men were dressed alike and wore dark hoodies, which made them stand out from the other customer. As they entered the shop, they seemed out of place and they're lingering. Scanning the area caused Paula to feel uneasy. The situation escalated when they moved toward her, cornering her against the wall. Then, a young courier knocked on the glass door, breaking the tense atmosphere. Two suspicious men quickly left the store, and the delivery person accidentally rescued Paula from a dangerous situation. Paula felt a mix of anxiety and apprehension as she handed over the package, then she proceeded to close her shop, wrapping up her day. Her hands trembled as she called her mother, expressing her fear over the phone. Although her mother advised reporting the incident to the police, Paula declined. Maybe she was just scared, and no harm actually happened. The rest of the day, Paula's thoughts were consumed by the strange encounter and her husband Christian's recent behavior. Seeking comfort, she took a walk around the city, stopping at a cafe for coffee and then visiting her sister, where they shared a cup of fragrant tea. As they talked, Paula opened up to her sister about the frightening encounter at her shop and her troubled marriage. She shared how Christian had changed after their father's passing, becoming increasingly consumed by his addiction to alcohol and being unfaithful. For the first time, Paula let go of her pride and shame, confessing to her sister the pain she endured in her marriage. The conversation brought her a sense of relief and comfort. Paula's younger sister Adriana described her as lively, happy, enterprising, and hardworking, with a gentle and kind nature as a mother. One day, Paula discussed her long-term goals with her sister, including her aspirations for her daughter's future careers and her own plans for the business. She was a selfless and dedicated person. After their emotional conversation, Paula headed home. However, her journey was interrupted by a phone call from Christian. He informed her that he was picking up their daughter from her play activities and would also stop by the shop to pick up his other daughter. The background noise of children's voices made his conversation rushed. Paula didn't get an opportunity to tell Christian about a disturbing incident at her shop, largely because she suspected his possible involvement. Paula reluctantly went back to work, putting her family's needs before her own. Christian soon arrived alone, explaining that their daughter had opted to go home early, and he couldn't refuse her request. He told Paula that the girls were waiting for dinner at home and were looking forward to hamburgers. Then, Christian took Paula to the courtyard of a shopping center several blocks away, rather than a nearby fast food joint. After parking the car in a secluded area, he left Paula inside while he went to collect their order. As she relaxed in the passenger seat after a stressful day, Paula closed her eyes, unaware of the danger approaching. Two familiar figures soon appeared near the car, talking loudly and circling the vehicle. Paula recognized them as the unexpected visitors who had been to her shop. She tried to remain calm, trusting that the car was secure and Christian would return soon. However, the car's lights suddenly flashed, and the door locks disengaged. Panicked, Paula scrambled to the back seat, hiding between the seats and covering her head with her arms. Unfortunately, she was trapped with no escape. One of the intruders took the driver's seat, and the other got into the back seat. There, he pinned Paula down, making her situation worse. She then felt a warm liquid flowing down her arm, and shortly after, she lost consciousness. Paula sustained severe injuries, including 11 knife wounds on her neck and 2 on her face. A violent attack left Paula heavily injured and her assailants fled the scene. 7 minutes later, Christian returned to the car and witnessed a horrifying scene. The inside of the car was covered in blood. Panicked, Christian called emergency services and struggled to explain the situation clearly. After notifying Paula's mother about the attack, Christian drove to the hospital, but sadly, Paula died in the emergency room before receiving medical attention. Christian's reaction to his wife's tragic death was one of intense grief. Paula's sudden and violent death left everyone in shock, and many questions remained unanswered about the identity and motives of her attackers. Investigators discovered that $600 and a gold necklace were missing from Paula's purse, so they initially suspected a robbery. Further investigation revealed that 2 unknown men had visited Paula's store earlier that day, captured on city cameras. Although the footage showed the suspects wearing hoodies, making their faces unidentifiable, but images from the security camera footage still provide some clues for investigators to pursue. 2 months after the tragic incident, Paula's family was still seeking justice, but the investigation had made little progress. However, things changed when Paula's younger sister, Adriana, shared important information that she suspected Christian was involved in the case. Adriana told investigators about her conversation with Paula on the day of the incident. Revealing Christian's infidelity and domestic violence towards Paula, which led Paula to consider ending her marriage. Christian had a motive for the crime, because if the divorce happened, his ambitions would be affected and he would lose his wealth and social status. The prosecution learned about this lead further and conducted a search of Christian's home, where they found incriminating messages on his phone. These messages revealed multiple affairs and strained marital relations. Another critical piece of evidence was a document that Paula had refused to sign, which would have transferred the company to other investors. As the prosecution continues to gather evidence against Christian, they uncover new details that shed further light on the complexities of Christian and Paula's relationship. Notably, 2 weeks after the incident, Adriana discovered a transaction that raised further suspicions about Christian's behavior. She discovered that he had made a significant transaction, transferring $2,000 to an unidentified woman's bank account. He made a payment from his wife Paula's account while she was dying from her injuries. It seems Christian has been waiting for the right opportunity to do this. Investigations confirmed that on the day of the incident, Christian made a $2,000 transfer to Lara Castillo's bank account. Lara, a 28-year-old woman, was questioned by police after her identity was discovered as the recipient of the payment. Lara explained that she had noticed her bank card was missing a couple of days before the transfer but hadn't thought much of it, assuming her brother had borrowed it. Although her account received the payment, Lara denied knowing Christian and had a solid alibi for the time of the incident, which cleared her of any involvement. She was released from questioning, but the investigation was left at a dead end once again. Days after the crime, Lara went back to the police station with an update on her brother. As she initially suspected, he had indeed returned her bank card. Lara gave a detailed description of her brother's appearance, which matched one of the criminals caught on surveillance cameras near the car. One crucial piece of evidence was that one attacker had neglected to pull up his hood while fleeing the scene, allowing his face to be seen. The investigation led to the identification of 2 offenders, Byron and Morton Castillo, who had an extensive history of criminal activity. The 2 criminals were arrested, but the question remains, why did these criminals target Paula? A deeper investigation revealed that they had attacked Paula repeatedly. On December 8, 2022, Paula was the victim of a car theft at a gas station. As she was distracted by one man, his accomplice quickly got into her car and drove away. Thankfully, her daughters were not in the vehicle at the time. The gas station's surveillance footage revealed the identities of the perpetrators. Besides, Paula had unknowingly met one of the thieves earlier that day. In a surprising turn of events, Christian then came forward claiming that the thieves had contacted him. He arranged a meeting with them, and during this encounter, he managed to retrieve Paula's stolen belongings, including her wallet. This action of Christian makes people suspicious of his true intentions and wonder if he is collaborating with the thieves. Surveillance cameras became key in identifying the men involved in the carjacking. And Christian realized he was a suspect. To divert the police's suspicion, Christian created a new defense story, claiming that he had been blackmailed by Byron and Morton. They demanded a large sum of money from him. However, before he could make this statement, the police acted quickly by questioning Byron and Morton separately and only telling one of them that the other suspect had confessed. The police obtained a confession from Morton. According to Morton's statement, Christian had paid them $2,000 over 2 months before to kill his wife, Paula, with the promise of an additional $2,000 after the murder. During a reenactment of the crime, Morton showed how he inflicted 11 fatal knife wounds on the Paula. With the crime exposed, Morton callously revealed all the details about his and Christian's arrangement. Morton exposed that the car theft and the attack on Paula's shop were also tactics used by Christian to intimidate her. Fortunately, Paula survived for a few hours longer than planned. On November 29, 2023, the 3 suspects, Christian, Byron, and Morton, appeared in court. The prosecution presented a detailed account of the incidents on the day of the murder, compiled from multiple sources. Surveillance camera footage from the area where Christian parked his car was analyzed using forensic techniques. The footage revealed a disturbing series of incidents. In the video, Christian is seen leaving his car and walking towards an elevator in a nearby shopping center. Soon after, Christian is seen remotely unlocking his car from a distance, allowing 2 accomplices, Byron and Morton, to enter the vehicle and attack Paula. The prosecutor's report highlighted Christian's unusual behavior after the attack. Surveillance videos showed him pacing back and forth, making phone calls, and even approaching and then retreating from the car. When he found his bleeding wife, he displayed no signs of shock or a sense of urgency to get her medical help. According to the videos, during the first 4 minutes after the attack, Christian's actions were calm and deliberate. He callously handled financial transactions, paying Byron and Morton for their role in the assault, while Paula lay bleeding in the car. At the time, she was still alive. Paula's family lawyers used this footage as evidence, urging the court to consider it as an aggravating factor in the crime. Christian dropped off Byron and Morton near Paula's store before the attack. However, these individuals arrived at the store earlier than expected, suggests that the original murder may have been planned for the store's closing time, when Paula was alone and eating lunch. The sequence of incidents presented in court during Christian's trial indicates that the crime was premeditated. Several hours before the 1:30 p.m. attack, prosecutor Marlon Calderon pointed out inconsistencies in the suspects' actions, highlighting the question of how they knew Paula would be at the store at that time, unless they had been following them. Furthermore, Christian's behavior was scrutinized as evidence of his involvement in the crime. Notably, he was observed not fully closing the car window and unlocking the doors near the store. Additionally, he was seen pacing back and forth multiple times before assisting his wife and making phone calls, rather than immediately seeking medical attention at a nearby clinic. These actions are central to the case against him, which accuses him of orchestrating the murder of his wife, Paula. Testimonies from 10 witnesses, including neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, revealed Christian's true motives and objectives. He tried to pressure Paula into transferring her shares in the company because he could not sign a legal contract, but his efforts were unsuccessful. Although Christian did not physically harm Paula, he inflicted severe psychological abuse on her, artfully concealing it under the guise of a perfect family life. The Prosecutor General's report stated that video evidence implicated Christian as the mastermind behind the crimes, leading to his isolation. This measure is not an arrest warrant but a precautionary step to curb his threat to society. After this incident, Christian was accused of orchestrating his wife's death. His defense team tried their best to defend that he was innocent. However, they were unsuccessful in refuting key evidence, including surveillance footage and falsified company transfer documents. The defense team then changed their strategy, attempting to depict Christian as suffering from a mental disorder. Multiple psychiatrists evaluated Christian, but ultimately, he was deemed competent to stand trial. With the gravity of the situation becoming increasingly clear, Christian's defense counsel advised him to flee the country. They asked if his passport was ready and suggested that he purchase a ticket to Panama for the next day. However, this plan to evade justice ultimately failed. Christian's search for Central American flight tickets initially raised suspicion with the authorities. Following this discovery, the prosecutor quickly ordered an 8-hour detention of Christian. This was succeeded by the presentation of charges and the disclosure of case details to a specialized domestic violence judge, preceding the trial. Christian was held in pre-trial detention as the alleged mastermind behind an extreme act of violence that left 2 young children without a mother and their family to grieve. The Paula Ortega family demands justice for this heinous crime, emphasizing the immense pain and suffering inflicted on their children and the devastating loss they endured. After the case was widely publicized, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, finding Christian and his 2 accomplices, Byron and Morton, committed a brutal, intentional and carefully planned crime. As the trio showed no remorse, Christian and Byron and Morton were ultimately sentenced to 26 years in prison. The municipal authorities of Ruminawi are deeply saddened by the loss of Paula. They expressed their heartfelt condolences to her family and friends. Paula was a highly respected businesswoman, a loving friend, mother, and wife who played a vital role in the development of the canton and bringing prosperity to those around her. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Sajini. In December 2002, Tharun Jinaraj and Sajini Krishnan, a newlywed couple, started their life together. Tharun and Sajini's marriage was arranged, but the couple was very happy and were building a life together in their apartment. Tharun, a physical education teacher at a local school and a volleyball coach, his wife, Sajini, worked at a bank. Whenever Tharun went to watch volleyball, he would remind his wife, Sajini, that due to the unsafe burglary situation in the area, Sajini should go to her father's house instead of staying alone in their apartment. Sajini's father lived nearby, so she would go to her father's house whenever Tharun went to watch volleyball. On February 5, 2003, Sajini visited her father's house for the last time. Before leaving, she said that she needed money to fill up her car's gas tank. Sajini's father was surprised and asked if Tharun was taking good care of her. Sajini appeared angry and dismissed her father's concerns, saying, "Dad, there's no such thing." Her short reply made her father feel uncomfortable, thinking that it might just be a minor disagreement between the couple. On February 14, 2003, at 7:30 p.m., Sajini had a phone conversation with her sister that lasted about 15 minutes. 2 hours later, at about 9:30 p.m., Tharun contacted Sajini's father, informing him to come to the hospital immediately because Sajini's condition was critical. Family members rushed to the hospital and found that Sajini had passed away. Tharun was deeply moved and cried loudly. Sajini's cause of death was determined to be strangulation with a scarf. When the police arrived at the scene, Tharun reported that their house had been broken into, jewelry and money had been stolen, and belongings had been thrown around. Initially, the police suspected that the thieves might have killed Sajini when she discovered them. Thurin's emotional state was so shocked that he couldn't stop crying. His pain was too great, and as a result, his condition worsened. He was so distraught that he couldn't even attend Sajini's funeral. Due to his deteriorating condition, Thurin was hospitalized, where his family provided him with emotional support. Meanwhile, the police were working to identify potential suspects by compiling a list of known thieves in the area. On February 16, 2003, 2 days after Sajini's death, Thurin's brother contacted the police, informing them that Thurin had escaped from the hospital. The police were shocked to find that Thurin had escaped from the hospital. Initially, they had assumed that Thurin was completely innocent due to his poor condition, so the police did not assign anyone to closely monitor Thurin while he was in the hospital. However, Thurin's sudden disappearance aroused the police's suspicions. Sajini's family began questioning the police, demanding to know why they had let their guard down and allowed Thurin to escape. As the case attracted widespread media attention, the pressure on the police increased. They immediately launched a thorough search for Thurin. Meanwhile, Thurin's family was also brought in for questioning by the police, but they were released after a few days. Thurin lived with Sajini in an apartment, while the rest of his family lived elsewhere. A massive search operation was launched across the city to find Thurin. The police set up roadblocks at several locations. Despite these efforts, Thurin remained undetected. Pressure from Sajini's family on the police led to the announcement of a large reward for anyone providing information on Thurin's whereabouts. However, even this lucrative offer failed to yield any leads. Police searches were ultimately unsuccessful. It was later revealed that Thurin had been mistreating Sajini since their marriage, motivated by his extramarital affair with another woman. The police eventually tracked down the girl Thurin had been involved with. She told them that on February 16th, Thurin had called her and asked her to marry him. However, she had already learned about Sajini's death by then. As a result, she rejected Thurin's proposal outright, telling him she couldn't marry someone suspected of murder. After that, Thurin and the girl lost contact. Nearly 6 years passed without any update on Thurin from the police. The police kept a close watch on Thurin's family, thinking that he might contact or return home. However, Thurin did not see or contact his family during this time. The police discovered that exactly 6 years after the incident, Thurin had visited his parents in another state, but only briefly, as his father had passed away just a day later. Although the police expected Thurin to return for his father's funeral, Thurin did not return. In 2016, a new officer joined the department and reviewed the case file, asking for an update. The police informed him of the current situation, that Thurin's father had passed away, his mother was ill and living in Madhya Pradesh, and his brother lived in Ahmedabad, but there was still no information about Thurin's whereabouts. The police conducted another investigation by discreetly monitoring the area around Thurin's mother's house, looking for any young men who might visit her. Unfortunately, no leads were found. The police then decided to question the girl who had a relationship with Thurin. She reported that she had not had any contact with Thurin since the incident. However, some of her friends had recently mentioned to her that they thought they saw someone who looked like Thurin at a mall in Delhi. The police formed a team to investigate this new information and visited the mall in Delhi. They checked the footage from all the surveillance cameras, but could not find any evidence of Thurin. After receiving multiple reports of sightings of Thurin in various states, the police became increasingly convinced that he was still alive. They therefore launched a thorough investigation by analyzing around 4,000 mobile phone numbers linked to Thurin's family and friends, hoping to uncover a vital clue. Although their search did not yield any significant breakthroughs, the police were determined to find Thurin. They kept a close watch on his mother's phone, scrutinizing her calls to identify her contacts. Thurin's mother received a call on her mobile phone from a landline number in Bengaluru, also known as the Silicon Valley of India. The call originated from the customer care service of a Bengaluru-based Oracle company. This made the police wonder about the connection between Thurun's mother and the Oracle company. The police suspected that Thurun, whom they were looking for, might be working at the Oracle office in Bengaluru. A police team traveled from Ahmedabad to Bengaluru to investigate further. On October 22, 2018, police visited the Oracle office and met the HR department, but police did not disclose the real purpose of their visit. Instead, they informed the HR department that police needed a list of all employees for law and order purposes. The HR department cooperated and provided the police with a complete list of all Oracle employees. In order to avoid being detected by Thurun, the police had to be extremely careful in their approach, as they knew that Thurun would likely escape if he realized that the police were following him. The problem was, Thurun's name was not on the list that Oracle had provided to the police. This made them worry that their efforts might be in vain. However, one name on the list stood out: Parvin Batelli. When the police recalled that Thurun's mother often spoke to Parvin and his wife, Nisha, this connection piqued the police's interest, and they decided to gather more information about Parvin and Nisha in the hope of finding clues about Thurun. The police found it suspicious that Parvin and Nisha were not active on social media, as this is a rare phenomenon in today's digital age, when most people actively share their lives on social media. The police learned that Thurun's mother frequently talked to Parvin Batelli. In addition, Parvin and Nisha had 2 children. The police began to suspect that Parvin Batelli could be Thurun. Therefore, the police began to collect evidence against him. One feature of Thurun's finger during his time as a volleyball coach was a broken and slightly bent finger on his ring hand. On October 23, 2 policemen went to Oracle's customer service office in Bangalore to meet Parvin. When one of the policemen shook hands with Parvin, the policeman immediately recognized Thurun because of the familiar broken finger. The policeman said, "Thurun, your game is over." Upon hearing Thurun's name, Parvin's condition worsened. Thurun's mistake began when his cell phone stopped working, leaving him worried about his mother. Thurun used his office landline instead of a number he could safely use to contact his mother. This last mistake led to his arrest. If he had not used his office landline, the police likely would not have found him. Thurun was taken to Ahmedabad by the police, where he confessed to the crime, admitting to killing his wife Sajini Krishnan. Thurun shared the entire story with the police. After the murder, Thurun proposed to a friend, but was rejected. He then moved to Pune, took up a small job, and met Nisha. Thurun tricked Nisha into believing that he was an orphan with no family, after which the two got married. The couple moved to Bangalore in 2009, where Thurun began working for Oracle. After years of investigation and manhunt, Thurun Jinaraj was finally recaptured in 2019. In March 2021, he was sentenced to life in prison for attempted murder. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Frank Spencer. Frank Spencer was born on November 10, 1965, in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania. His father was Cyrus, and his mother was Melina Spencer. Since childhood, Frank loved active games and sports, which helped him maintain a healthy body and mind. When he was in high school, he demonstrated his special ability on the wrestling team and was recognized as an excellent member. Frank had a strong ambition in business and wanted to continue the family business. So, after graduating from high school in 1984, he attended a local university and completed his course in 1988. After his father passed away, Frank became the owner of Spencer's Auto Parts. The year 1997 marked an important event in Frank's life. It was the year he met Maria. The two of them were attracted to each other at first sight. Maria was known for her hot temper and daring personality, which intrigued Frank. Frank's friend Paul remembered that Frank had always liked strong and wild people. And he was a bit like that too. When Frank and Maria met, they had a great start. However, not everyone was happy with the relationship. Maria's parents, in particular, had mixed opinions about Frank. They believed that Frank was not the right man for their daughter. Furthermore, there were rumors that Frank's father had been involved in a gang and was even a hired criminal. Maria's father did not have a good impression of Frank. He even tried to prevent their marriage for a while. Frank's family was also not happy with Frank's choice. So, Frank and Maria decided to run away and rent a separate apartment to get away from their families. After a while, Frank's family and Maria's family were forced to accept their relationship. Family life gradually returned to normal. Maria and Frank got married and had 2 children, a boy and a girl. They then moved to a new house. During this time, Frank owned an auto parts business and sponsored race cars. He worked hard to provide his family with everything they needed. For Frank, his children were the top priority and driving force in his life. Maria initially tried to manage the housework and take care of the children. However, later, despite having a law degree, she became the coach of her daughter's soccer team. Her friends said that, unlike her husband, she was not really interested in the marriage. She seemed to be uninterested in work and family responsibilities. What worried her most was the financial issue. She liked to spend what Frank earned. Maria Spencer had a cold personality, especially towards the children. This caused many problems in her marriage. Her husband was frustrated with her selfishness and eccentricity and expected her to change when she became a mother. However, Maria remained her own person. In 2006, her husband decided to file for divorce because he could no longer stand her inappropriate behavior and constant scandals. He feared for the health of the children because of her unreasonable behavior. After the divorce, the relationship between the two became even more strained. A confrontation over custody was inevitable. Maria wanted to keep the children with her, but her husband did not trust her and believed that she could not take good care of them. However, not everyone agreed with her husband's views. For example, her husband's friend, Ron, believed that both parents were necessary for the children to develop normally. Frank's friend advised him to negotiate with Maria for custody of the children. However, Frank thought he knew better than his friends and continued to demand sole custody. Maria did the same. She also hoped to receive a substantial amount of child support. The conflict between Frank and Maria worsened over time. On several occasions, due to Maria's erratic behavior, Frank had to call the police for help. Maria repeatedly attacked Frank and the children, but not everyone believed this. In 2008, an incident occurred that confirmed Frank's accusations. After a fight with Maria near their children's school, Maria was arrested. The problem stemmed from Maria wanting to pick up her daughter. But Frank's relatives prevented her. The reason was that the two had made another agreement, but Maria changed her mind at the last minute. After the fight, Maria put the child in the car but forgot to fasten the seatbelt. When the police checked her car, they discovered that Maria's actions could endanger the life and health of the child. As a result, Maria got into trouble with the law. She was charged with disorderly conduct and child endangerment. In addition, Frank also accused Maria of stalking him, claiming that she had stalked him on multiple occasions. For this reason, Maria faced an additional charge. Maria could not be convicted of endangering the life of the child because the prosecution could not prove it. Therefore, the authorities decided to drop the charge in exchange for Maria's admission of guilt for disorderly conduct and stalking. Maria agreed and was fined $600. However, this event did not make Maria reconsider her behavior. Instead, she continued to act negatively. Frank's acquaintances and relatives increasingly heard complaints from him about Maria threatening and stalking him. Some of Maria's co-workers also said that she repeatedly mentioned that she hated Frank and was willing to harm him. For this reason, one of her co-workers nicknamed her Black Widow. Frank tried to stay calm and smooth over the rough edges, but Maria wouldn't stop. He kept trying to talk to her, but she wouldn't listen. Frank started recording every conflict so that he would have evidence in case something bad happened. He just wanted to live and work in peace, but Maria took it too far. In 2009, Frank tried to stay positive and eventually met a woman named Julie. However, Maria soon learned about his new relationship. According to Maria, she didn't care that Frank was dating Julie, but what bothered her was that Frank gave Julie access to the children. However, Frank thought that Maria was extremely jealous, and that was the cause of all the trouble. Maria then became very angry. In February 2009, she sent a voice message to Julie, warning her not to go near the children. However, the situation worsened when Maria's father was released from prison after serving 5 years for fraud. His reputation was already bad, and for Frank, this meant more trouble, as he knew Maria's father had a fierce temper. Many believed that Maria had inherited her fierce personality from her father. As Frank became pensive and anxious, his colleagues noticed it too. The first incident that happened after Maria's father Anthony was released was a robbery at Frank's office. Important documents that could affect Frank's divorce were stolen. The next day, Maria called Frank and hinted that she had found something interesting. Frank understood that she was referring to the stolen documents and advised her to return them. At the same time, he also reported the incident to the police. However, it was unsuccessful in proving that someone was involved in the incident. The detectives did not find any traces of the perpetrator. However, everyone suspected that Maria and her father were involved in the crime. The police also considered Maria a suspect. In the end, the investigation of the case was stopped. However, thanks to the intervention of the police, Maria returned the stolen documents to the owner. It is likely that these documents did not contain any important information that could be used in court. The situation between Frank and Maria continued to escalate. Frank's patience was at its limit after Maria repeatedly threatened him on social media. This was because Frank's children were still in contact with his new partner, Julie. Julie, on the other hand, remained calm and balanced, enjoying her time with Frank and his children. She tried not to interfere in Frank and Maria's complicated relationship. However, Frank was extremely angry that Maria had neglected her parental responsibilities. The arguments between the two continued until 2010. At that point, Frank sought the intervention of law enforcement. He asked the police to evaluate Maria's behavior. Despite the threats, Maria insisted that it was just her way of communicating and that she meant nothing reprehensible. Again, Maria's guilt could not be proven because her warnings were vague. In January 2010, a fire brought negativity to Frank. In a strange coincidence, before a romantic trip to the Caribbean islands that he had planned, a fire broke out at Frank's mother's house the night before the trip. Fortunately, no one was injured, but all the property was destroyed by fire and smoke. During this fire, witnesses reported seeing a car driven by Maria, accompanied by neighbors and friends, visiting the house at that time. Maria smiled and watched the fire before leaving. After the fire department put out the fire, a dog owned by one of Frank's children was found dead in the fire. Maria's actions crossed the line, forcing the police to investigate the incident. Unfortunately, there was no clear evidence of arson at the time, and the fire was ruled an accident. Maria then sent Frank a frantic text message, gloating about how karma had caught up with him and how her life had been ruined. She hinted that Frank could face more consequences in the future. Maria also began sending similar messages to Julie, Frank's new partner. When the police failed to act, Maria's aggression escalated. She became so dangerous that she openly threatened Frank and Julie. A few months later, a fire broke out at Julie's house. This time, the situation could have been much worse. Julie was home when the fire broke out, but she was lucky to escape by jumping off the porch. Although she was uninjured, her house was severely damaged and uninhabitable. As a result, Frank invited Julie to move in with him. Frank and Julie feared that this would only make Maria angrier, but they had no other choice. The police are investigating the exact cause of the fire. A similar situation in the past suggests that the fire may have been intentionally set by an individual. Frank and Julie live in a different district than the burned street, so they hope that the police will conduct a fair and impartial investigation. However, once again, there is not much they can do due to the lack of concrete evidence. However, the investigators did not give up. Julie hired private investigators to join the investigation, which pushed the inquiry in a new direction. During the inspection, 2 flares were found on the lawn. One was broken and lying nearby. Investigators also discovered that the fire had spread from the steps leading to the balcony of the house. Finally, after collecting and examining the data, experts determined that the cause of the fire was arson. However, the lack of direct evidence has prevented authorities from identifying the perpetrators. The suspects remain at large and have not been prosecuted for their crimes. The cold summer of 2012 marked a tragic event in the life of the Frank family. In June 2012, Frank and Julie decided to split up, but in reality, it was just a plan to distract Maria. However, this also marked the final farewell of the Frank family. Just a few weeks later, Frank was found dead. On July 3rd, Joe, a close friend of Frank's, decided to visit him because he had not heard from him for a while. Joe and Frank used to take their children out together, and their team was currently in an important series of matches. However, when Frank did not answer the phone, Joe decided to visit him in person. When he arrived at Frank's house, Joe became worried when he saw that the front door was slightly ajar and there were stains near it. His fear was confirmed when he entered the house and saw Frank lying motionless on the floor. Frank's face was serene, as if he had finally found the peace he had been looking for. However, when Joe walked around the body, he saw dried blood in Frank's ear. Without hesitation, Joe called emergency services. As news of the incident spread throughout the county, everyone knew that this was a terrible crime. However, the detectives had to take matters into their own hands to find out who was behind this murder. Investigators discovered many important signs at the crime scene. They found large pools of blood and drag marks on the floor, along with a clear shoe print and bloody gloves in the kitchen. This physical evidence was sent for analysis. The investigation results showed that the bloody shoe print matched the size of the gloves that Maria's father, Anthony, often wore. Furthermore, Maria's DNA was found on the gloves. Since Maria had not lived with the family for over a year, the presence of her DNA on the gloves was unlikely to have happened by accident. All the evidence pointed to the involvement of Anthony and Maria in the case. Both were subsequently arrested. Autopsy results and ballistics analysis revealed that Frank had been shot with 2 different weapons. The first bullet was fired from a .30 caliber sniper rifle as he stood by the front door. Forensic experts found a sniper nest about 115 feet from the house. The bullet went through Frank's arm and chest, causing severe and fatal injuries. The attackers dragged Frank into the house, where they fired a final shot into his head with a .357 Magnum revolver. Frank was already dead at that point. This action was considered an act of revenge, suggesting that the shooter harbored a grudge against the victim. Police speculated that Anthony shot Frank with the rifle. There were also some important clues left behind. Frank's car and dog were missing from the house, implicating Anthony and Maria. A review of traffic cameras showed Frank's car driving away from the victim's house shortly after the crime. However, the driver could not be identified. The car was later found in Sunbury, Pennsylvania, 27 miles from Frank's house and 5 miles from Maria's residence. However, no fingerprints or other evidence were found inside the car. Frank's dog was found 2 days after the crime when it wandered into a wedding in Dauphin. Thanks to an electronic chip, attendees realized that the dog had an owner. The dog was later returned to Frank's mother. The fact that Frank had purchased the dog after the fire helped shed some light on the case. During the investigation, detectives discovered that the criminals had taken the dog as they were fleeing the scene. During the time Anthony was stopped, the dog was attracted to the smell of food nearby and escaped. It then wandered into a house where a wedding was being held, where it was found. This helped detectives prove that Anthony's phone was near the venue of the celebration on the day of the crime, even though he claimed to be at home in Harrisburg, 12 miles away. It is possible that Maria was the one who put the dog in the car, but this decision proved to be a mistake. During questioning, Anthony admitted that Frank had asked him for help several times and that he had visited Frank the day before Frank died. This would explain the traces found at the crime scene. However, Anthony could not explain the presence of the pool of blood. His testimony sounded disingenuous. Anthony also confessed that Frank had given him the car to use that same day, apparently to justify his fingerprints at the victim's house. This would indicate that he had been at the crime scene the day before. Searches were conducted at Anthony and Maria's homes to find the murder weapon, but Anthony was a seasoned criminal and knew how to handle weapons. Therefore, neither the rifle nor the pistol was found. Maria also refused to admit her guilt. She assumed that the glove had been accidentally sent to her ex-husband's house, possibly because the children had moved it one day. Eventually, Anthony and Maria were released to go home. However, detectives continued to investigate and collect the evidence needed to solve the case. Meanwhile, Frank's friend Derek Reed tried to talk to Maria at a school football game. During the conversation, Maria confessed that the last thing her husband saw before he died was her face. This statement was strange and curious. The investigation into Frank's death received intense attention from the state attorney general. The attorney general was furious with the indifference of the authorities to Frank's reports and statements. The police also faced numerous complaints of incompetence, and an internal investigation was inevitable. However, the police's negligence in their duties could not be proven. The reason was that much of the information provided by Frank, which the police believed lacked solid evidence, contributed to Frank's tragic death. The public and Frank's relatives were outraged that their petition had not yielded results. Meanwhile, investigators tried to prove the suspect's guilt not only in the crime but also in stalking and other crimes committed before. In 2013, a major interrogation was held. At the same time, Maria and Anthony continued to claim their innocence, denying all 12 charges against them. Their unwillingness to cooperate with the investigation led to charges of providing false testimony. Prosecutors argued that the suspects had arrived at Frank's home together, but they chose not to use their own vehicles to avoid attracting attention. Instead, they fled the scene in Frank's car. By the end of 2014, Maria was recaptured. Meanwhile, Anthony successfully escaped. After being interrogated one last time, Anthony boarded a plane and flew to Colombia. According to the investigation, Anthony's escape was evidence that he was hiding his guilt. For 11 months, Anthony was on the run but was eventually captured in Buenos Aires, Argentina. After being arrested by local police, he fought extradition to the United States but was unsuccessful and was deported back to his home country. In the fall of 2015, Maria's trial began. She continued to deny her guilt and blamed her father. She claimed that she loved Frank and never wanted him dead. However, multiple witnesses came forward to shed light on her true nature, recounting the threats, stalking, and sabotage she had committed. After more than a week of trial, the jury returned a verdict, finding her guilty on all counts, including murder, arson, burglary, perjury, conspiracy, and menacing. Maria was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 50 years. Witnesses reported that she smiled throughout the trial. Years later, Anthony's trial began. Anthony was furious when he heard his daughter's accusations. He claimed he was only helping her but objected to the use of violence. However, the physical evidence suggested otherwise. Finally, in the fall of 2018, Anthony was convicted of murder, robbery, and arson. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus 45 years. When he was sentenced, the 77-year-old blew a kiss to the prosecutor and the lead detective before cursing at the judge. Years later, Anthony sought to appeal, claiming his defense attorney was ineffective, which led to his conviction. His daughter, Maria, also tried to appeal her case. However, both Maria and Anthony efforts were unsuccessful. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Ronald Platt. July 28, 1996, began as a typical summer day in South England. Captain John Kopek and his son prepared for a fishing trip on their trawler, the Melkerry. Despite an unsuccessful day, they decided to try their luck in a spot known as the Roughs. They lowered the net into the water and waited. The two men felt a tug on the net, indicating that it was a large catch. However, when they pulled the net up, they were shocked to find that it was not a fish, but instead a badly decomposed body of a man. Captain Kopek immediately contacted the Brixham Coast Guard to report the discovery. The body was in a state of severe decomposition, indicating that it had been in the ocean for some time. Fish had nibbled at parts of the body, but despite the decomposition, the man's clothing was intact: a long-sleeved shirt, corduroy pants, and brown shoes. And there was no identification on the body. The only identifying features found on the dead man were a smudged tattoo on his right hand and a Rolex watch on his wrist. The body was taken to the medical examiner's office in Devon for further examination. It was estimated that the man was between 40 and 50 years old. A distinctive tattoo of a cluster of stars was found on his body. His only severe injury was a head wound, which was not fatal. This, combined with other bruising, suggested that he had been dragged along the seabed before being pulled into a boat. However, his lungs were filled with water, indicating that he had ultimately drowned. Police suspected that the man might have fallen overboard during a ferry crossing. The primary method for identifying him was through dental records, as they would be on file if he was a British citizen. However, this process would take some time. It was by chance that a mortuary technician noticed the man's watch, a Rolex Oyster self-winding model that was fully waterproof. The watch required regular motion to stay active and, as an original model, its ownership could potentially be traced. Police examined the watch found on the unidentified man and discovered a crucial clue. The calendar feature showed the date July 22nd, indicating that the man had likely drowned 2 days earlier, on July 20th, 1996. Further examination revealed a serial number hidden between the wristband and the watch face. Police sent this number to Rolex to verify its authenticity and determine who owned the watch. The mystery surrounding the man, now known as Rolex Man, gained further clues a few weeks later, after a records search identified the watch's owner as Ronald Joseph Platt. Ronald Joseph Platt was a 51-year-old TV repairman born in Calgary, Canada. His family later moved to Britain, where he grew up. Ronald remained unmarried and had served in the British Army as part of his national service. Those who knew him well described Ronald as a quiet and introverted man with a deep love for his native Canada. Ronald bought a Rolex watch in Germany in 1967, which became one of his most prized possessions. Ronald was so attached to the watch that, according to his former partners, he even wore it in the shower. Detective Constable Clenaghan from the Devon and Cornwall Police was assigned to the case from the start. The police investigation revealed that Ronald's last known address was in Essex, which was hundreds of miles away from where his body was found. Clenaghan contacted the Essex Police Department for assistance. Inspector Peter Redmond offered to visit the address to help with the investigation. When he visited the house, Peter found it vacant. Peter then contacted the owner and was told that the owner had moved out some time ago. However, Peter was provided with a letter of introduction that could assist in the investigation. The letter provided the address and contact details of a man named David Davis. Detective Peter called the number and got in touch with Davis. Before delivering the news, Peter asked Davis about his relationship with Ronald. Peter then informed Davis that a body had been found in Devon that was likely to be his friend. Davis agreed to meet with the police in Essex to discuss the matter further. When they met, Peter found Davis to be friendly and confident, but surprisingly calm, and asked very few questions about Ronald's death. Davis and Ronald had been friends for several years. Davis hadn't seen Ronald in over 3 months, and the last time they met, Davis had given him a loan to start an electrical business in France. Since then, Davis had assumed Ronald was living in France. During their conversation, Peter discovered that the symbol tattooed on Ronald's hand was a maple leaf, the national symbol of Canada. After providing all the necessary information, Davis left the station, assuring Detective Peter that he would send a photo of Ronald. The Essex police were then able to conclude their investigation, forming the theory that Ronald had fallen overboard and drowned in the channel. This theory aligned with Davis's account of the events, suggesting it was simply an unfortunate accident. With the Essex case over, Clenaghan had a problem on his end. He tried to contact Davis several times but was unsuccessful. Clenaghan then asked his colleague, Detective Peter of Essex, to help him contact Davis. Peter agreed and visited Davis at his home in Wooden Walter, a rural area of Essex with only 4 houses. They continued to describe Ronald to Peter, and he suddenly realized that the man they were describing was none other than the recently deceased Ronald Platt. This sudden revelation aroused Peter's suspicions, and he quickly contacted Clenaghan in Devon to share this surprising discovery. Police from both counties began to suspect that there was more to the case than initially appeared. Peter turned his attention to gathering information about the man impersonating his deceased friend. Peter visited an elderly couple, Frank and Aubrey, who shared with him the story of Ronald Platt, a young man with a wife and 2 young children. The couple mentioned that Ronald and his family frequently vacationed in Devon, where they owned a yacht, although they could not remember the name of the yacht. In Devon, Clenaghan reviewed the evidence and began re-interrogating old witnesses. His first was John Coppock, who revealed that when Ronald's body was found, a 10-pound anchor had also been pulled up in the net. John Coppock had given the anchor to a friend, who then passed it on to his mother to sell. Fortunately, the anchor had not yet been sold, allowing the police to retrieve it as evidence. Clenaghan's next step was to interview people who knew Ronald. He contacted Ronald's brother, Brian. Brian mentioned Elaine Boyes, Ronald's old friend of 13 years. Police then spoke with Elaine Boyes and discovered the connection between Ronald Platt and Davis. Elaine Boyes had met Davis in 1991 while working as a receptionist at a fine arts auction house in Harrogate, England. She recalled Davis as being tall, engaging, and charming. During their conversation, Davis mentioned his plans to move to Yorkshire, and the topic turned to job opportunities. Davis offered Elaine Boyes a job at his company, but she declined, explaining that she and Ronald were planning to move to Canada soon. Davis offered to help Elaine Boyes and Ronald save money to move to Canada, Elaine Boyes soon became Davis's executive assistant, and she soon introduced Ronald to Davis. The two men quickly became close friends. Elaine Boyes and Ronald were fascinated by Davis's lavish stories and impressed by his lavish lifestyle. Davis then offered them a business opportunity, proposing that they become directors of his company, the Cavendish Corporation. Although Elaine Boyes was initially hesitant, Davis explained that he wanted to keep a low profile due to his ex-wife, a wealthy doctor in New York, who allegedly still demanded alimony payments from him. By this point, Elaine Boyes and Ronald had developed a trust in Davis and believed that he was genuinely trying to protect her from his ex-wife. Davis sent both Elaine Boyes and Platt on business trips to Europe to negotiate deals on his behalf, gradually drawing them into his scheme. They transferred money to various offshore bank accounts without asking Davis what he intended to do with it, trusting him greatly because of his religious nature. On Christmas Day 1992, Davis invited Elaine Boyes and Ronald to visit Davis and his daughter, Noelle. After a sumptuous meal, they exchanged gifts. Elaine Boyes presented Davis with a card titled "The Greatest Gift Ever." In return, Davis gave the couple 2 plane tickets to Canada, provided they used them before February 1993. While Elaine Boyes was overwhelmed by the short notice, Ronald was overjoyed that his lifelong dream of returning to Canada had finally come true thanks to Davis. In preparation for their upcoming trip, Davis quickly made arrangements. To ensure he could effectively manage their affairs while they were away, he asked Elaine Boyes and Ronald to stamp their signatures and leave their driver's licenses with him in case they needed to prove their identity. Elaine Boyes and Ronald agreed, as they trusted Davis and were grateful for the new beginning he provided. Consequently, in February 1993, they left for Canada. However, the harsh winter conditions, lack of job opportunities, and resulting financial strain quickly put pressure on their relationship. Elaine Boyes and Ronald's relationship began to unravel due to increasing tension, ultimately causing them to drift apart. 5 months later, Elaine Boyes traveled to England to serve as a bridesmaid at her sister's wedding, with no intention of returning to Canada. Davis, who had become a family friend, was also invited to the wedding. During the event, he spoke with Elaine Boyes and asked about Ronald. Upon learning that Elaine Boyes had ended her relationship with Ronald and would not be returning to Canada, Davis was upset. He attempted to persuade Elaine Boyes to give Ronald another chance, but she refused. Davis packed up his life, said goodbye to Elaine Boyes, and left her with his mobile number. However, their friendship eventually dissolved, and the phone calls ceased. Ronald and Elaine Boyes had lost contact. Ever since Elaine Boyes moved away from Canada, she had not heard from Ronald, her former lover, or Davis, who had been her best friend. So when Davis suddenly contacted Elaine Boyes in late 1996, their conversation was somewhat awkward. They barely exchanged any important information, and surprisingly, Davis did not even mention Ronald's name. The conversation was brief, and they did not keep in touch after that. He failed to tell her that Ronald was dead. After the interview, Elaine Boyes suspected Davis was involved in Ronald's death. Police needed more concrete evidence. They started questioning witnesses. Following the wedding in Harrogate, Davis quickly moved to Devon with his family. There, he introduced himself as Ronald Platt. He also introduced his pregnant daughter as his wife, sometimes calling her Elaine Boyes. It was well known that Davis owned a yacht. Witnesses reported seeing Ronald and Davis together a month before Ronald's body was discovered. They claimed to have registered on Steam Packet as brothers, David and Ronald Platt. By this point, police knew Davis had lied about Ronald and his knowledge of Ronald's death. They needed one last piece of evidence to confirm their suspicions. Police analyzed mobile records and discovered that the calls made by Davis originated from the same area where the medical examiner believed Ronald had drowned. This led Essex police to plan a sting operation to arrest Davis on suspicion of Ronald's murder. The police were informed by Elaine Boys that Davis had arranged to meet her for coffee at Chelmsford train station. The police arrived at the train station, however, Davis had escaped. Not giving up, Detective Peter decided to drive to the Davis family home. Pete called for backup. He speculated that Davis might be armed. As the police prepared to act, a taxi stopped at the entrance of the house, and Davis quickly escaped. The police promptly gave chase, and Davis was eventually caught and forced to surrender at gunpoint after Davis was arrested. Police took his fingerprints and submitted them to an international database. Albert Johnson Walker, a man on Interpol's wanted list and Canada's most wanted fugitive, was identified as the owner of the discovered prints. Albert Johnson's life story began in Canada. Born on August 9, 1945, in Hamilton, Ontario, Albert Johnson had big ambitions despite dropping out of high school. He had a charismatic presence. Albert Johnson met his ex-wife, Barbara MacDonald. They married in 1968. The couple started a family early and had 7 children, 3 girls and 4 boys. Albert Johnson was born in Paris, Ontario, where he and his wife Barbara started a freelance accounting business. The business grew rapidly, and within a decade, it had expanded to 6 locations with more than 30 employees. However, Albert Johnson deceived his friends and clients by secretly transferring their investments to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Over time, Albert Johnson's dishonesty wasn't the only problem he faced. His marriage began to fall apart due to his many affairs. Furthermore, those he had stolen money from began to become suspicious. With his empire on the brink of collapse, Albert Johnson decided to go on the run in 1990. Under the pretext of taking his 15-year-old daughter Sheena on a skiing trip to Europe, Albert Johnson escaped. Barbara discovered the incident and, concerned for her daughter's safety, reported her missing. The police tracked Albert Johnson to London, but lost track of him. Albert Johnson assumed a new identity, stolen from a client. He now went by the name Davis Wallace, and his daughter Sheena changed her name to Noelle. Although he evaded the police, the name Davis linked him back to his real identity. Davis Wallace needed a new identity, and his opportunity came when he met Ronald Platt. Ronald had a strong interest in Canada. Davis used this information to his advantage and created a new identity for himself. However, his plans began to fall apart in 1995 when Ronald contacted him, saying that Ronald was frustrated with life in Canada and was moving back to Essex to be closer to Davis. This development posed a problem for Davis, as having 2 Ronald Platts with the same birth date in the same area would have raised suspicion. To solve this problem, Davis came up with a plan. He bought a yacht, the Lady Jane, and took his family and Ronald to Totnes and Devon to celebrate the launch. During this trip, Davis and Ronald purchased a new 10-pound anchor. Davis invited Ronald to Devon for the weekend to go fishing and enjoy the coast. Davis took Ronald to his boat, the Lady Jane, far enough from shore to avoid detection. Once alone, Davis hit Ronald over the head with the anchor, knocking him unconscious. Davis then searched Ronald's pockets for identification and retrieved it. Davis tied the anchor to Ronald's waist to weigh him down and threw him into the water, intending to make it look like an accident. However, Davis made the mistake of leaving Ronald's Rolex watch on his wrist, which was later used to foil the carefully planned crime and bring Davis to justice. Davis's trial began in 1998. During the trial, some key evidence was presented to the court. The anchor found in the net along with Ronald Platt's body. Forensic experts analyzed the wound on Ronald's head and determined that it matched the shape of the anchor. Further investigation found traces of zinc on Ronald's belt, which matched the zinc found on the anchor. It was discovered that the anchor had been attached to Ronald's belt to drown him in the sea. A search of the yacht, Lady Jane, also uncovered significant evidence. Hairs matching Ronald's were found on a cushion, and his fingerprint was discovered on the bag that had been used to carry the anchor back to the yacht. Additionally, blood was found near the rails, providing further evidence to the case. Davis's hoarding habits cost him, as documents were seized and used to prove his sham business ventures and his trail of deception. Elaine Boy's testimony provided evidence that Davis would lose a lot if Ronald Platt returned to England. And his daughter Sheena testified that Davis had been out on a yacht and looked disheveled and agitated when he returned later that day of the murder. Sheena also spoke candidly about life with Davis and how she was constantly harassed by her father and feared for her own safety. Supreme Court Justice Neil Butterfield said Davis was an extremely intelligent and ruthless individual who posed a threat to others. He stated that Davis's crimes were carefully planned and executed with precision. As a result, Davis was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. In 2005, he was allowed to move to Canada to serve his sentence. 2 years later, at the age of 61, Davis was given an additional 4-year sentence to be served concurrently. In 2015, Davis applied for parole but withdrew it at the last minute.